lot of parts of ecology that we just don't have the time to go over. Sometime in the past I was able to do that, but not anymore, because I keep adding other stuff in other lectures. Okay, what is ecology? Okay, it's a branch of biology. Okay, it's a branch of biology that studies the relationships of organisms with their environment. And so that's a very, very broad definition. And it is not, and so what do we mean by the environment? It's all their surroundings. It involves both the living component, that is members of the same species, members of different species, predator-prey relationships, competition, with other species or with other individuals of the same species, and that's the biotic unit of the environment, other living things. But it also has a lot to do with non-living components in the environment, such as rainfall, weather, and soil type, wind, and so forth. And that's the abiotic components of the environment. And so ecology seeks to understand how all these things work together. And it's not the same thing, and a lot of times ecology, that word is used by popular people out there, politicians and so forth, when they really mean environmentalism. And so environmentalism, environmental studies, that should be informed by ecology, but sometimes it's driven by emotion, okay, quite a bit. Not always, okay? So it's, this is, ecology is actually a science, and therefore it makes no commitment as to what is right or wrong. Now, those are choices society must make, okay? We as people. What the ecology can tell us is what we're doing, okay? How we're damaging things and so forth. But it's still a branch of science. Now, you go to a university, they will have certain programs called environmental studies. And yeah, you will study ecology and some biology, but most of your study will be laws, okay, political laws, environmental laws. And that's usually what environmental studies is all about.
So we derive the environmental studies with the ecology that we learn?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So if you go into an environmental studies program, yeah, you will have to learn about ecology, but you'll also be learning a lot of law, okay, environmental law as well. Okay, now this can be studied, ecology has several branches, can be studied at many different levels, and unfortunately we're only going to go into the broadest level possible. But one is called organismal ecology. So organismal ecology is dealing with how do individuals of a species, so it's looking at individuals of the species, how they deal with their environmental challenges. So here you'd be wondering about the distribution of species. Why do you find this species here but not over there? Why is it living here but not somewhere else? And also, and a lot of times that has a lot to do with abiotic factors. Not always abiotic factors, but sometimes. And so how can they tolerate that? Okay, so certain plants can't live where it gets cold during the winter. Okay, certain plants can. Okay, this is abiotic factors. And so this is what organismal ecologists would be looking at. Population ecology is looking at the interactions between populations and their environment, not just individuals, but whole populations. So what affects population size, okay? What determines the size of the population and its fluctuations, okay? Sometimes it increases, sometimes the population size decreases. And then a broader branch is community ecology. What a community is, this is a term, the unit in ecology. Community encompasses all of the populations of all species within a given area. Okay, so it's a local region, and what we refer to as a community. And so it'd be all the plants, animals, microorganisms, etc., that happen to occupy a certain region. And or community ecologists, they're looking at and concerned about interactions between different species within the community. So predator-prey relationships and their effect on each other, because they do affect each other, okay? And competition between different species. In fact, sometimes if we have two species whose so-called ecological niche are too similar, competition will drive one species extinct in that area. Only one particular species can occupy the same living style. And diseases, how does that affect the community? Okay? And then the broadest is ecosystem ecology. So this is looking at interactions between not just only a community, the living biotic component, but also abiotic factors. Okay, the soil, the wind, sunshine, rainfall, and so forth. And that's what we're going to look at. Furthermore, it examines ecosystem ecology, examines the flow of energy through the whole system. Because all the energy that animates life, at least the vast majority of it, comes directly from the sun. Okay? And that is captured by plants and algae and some bacteria, turning the energy into chemical energy that in organic molecules, and then heterotrophs eat those. And so the energy flows through this complex community in a one way. Okay, so energy flow, and we're going to look at that at the end of this lecture, how that energy flow works. And chemical cycling. Carbon dioxide is cycled. Water is cycled through living systems. But it isn't just only that, there's also other types of cycles, phosphorus and iron, they cycle too. Some of these chemical cyclings can be, go through the whole ecosystem in a matter of days. Others, we're talking about millions of years, okay? Like phosphorus, that can be like that. Nitrogen cycling also goes through the system, okay? So our hierarchy of how it's organized, I already started biology 101A, that atoms form molecules. Molecules form something larger, organelles, cells, tissues, and up. So here we can continue that with ecology. Population, what is a population? We started out this semester talking about populations. What is
a member of the same species?
Okay, it's all the members of the species, one species in a particular area, okay? So populations, many populations can form communities, all the populations of all the species in a particular area. And many different communities form yet a larger unit that we refer to as ecosystems, okay? Ecosystem is the community plus the abiotic components. And many different ecosystems form larger structures, ecological structures that we refer to as biomes. And biomes are major habitats consisting of many different types of ecosystems, but usually they're all, the biome is characterized by a certain type of plant form, okay? For example, deserts. Deserts, what type of plants do you have in deserts? Do you have a lot of pine trees in deserts?
No.
No. It's mostly cacti or succulent plants that have reduced leaves or thick stems, and they can store water. And so that's what I mean by plant physiognomy. Whereas boreal forest, okay, taiga, is characterized by conifers, okay, primary, as a dominant type of tree. And so these are the major zones, and then on the Earth we're going to be looking at, and then all these biomes constitutes the biosphere. The biosphere can go deep into the Earth, way up into the sky, okay? It encompasses everything on Earth where you have life, is the biosphere. Now, I want to point out that these biomes may have a variety of ecosystems, okay? Because, for example, you can have in a desert a shrub ecosystem, okay, where it's mostly woody shrubs. But going through that desert, you can have a riparian ecosystem, a river, okay, or at least an intermittent place where there's water that gathers when it does rain. And that's a different ecosystem, still in the desert, biome, okay? So, overview there. Now, a lot of these places on Earth, where do you find deserts? Where do you find deciduous forests? Where do you find tropical rainforests? Where do you find grasslands? These are all major biomes. They're not there accidentally. Okay, there's a reason why they are found where they are found. And this is usually due to global patterns of abiotic factors. The abiotic factors are determining where the deserts happen to be, and so forth. And I'm just going to mention some important abiotic factors because I'm going to concentrate on them a little bit more. Temperature, okay? It's not the same all throughout the Earth, okay? Around the tropics, around the equator, temperatures are both day and night, relatively high. There's other places where temperatures toward the poles very low. And furthermore, the range of temperatures at the equator from day to night, season to season, the temperature doesn't change all that much. Whereas you go further into temperate regions, further toward the poles, then the temperature fluctuations between night and day, and also from season to season, can be pretty drastic. And so those are certain important abiotic factors play a role here. Water availability. Now this is not the same thing as precipitation. It is related, but in high mountain areas where the water is permanently frozen, which is disappearing in glaciers, then water, even though it's there, is just not available, okay, because it's in the form of ice. So water availability is a big abiotic factor. And the amount of sunlight, okay? That is not evenly distributed across the face of the Earth. And also the amount of sunlight differs. It differs from season to season. That's important for photosynthesis. Also, the sunlight is very much related to the temperature, okay? Because this is radiant energy. The radiant energy is absorbed by objects on the ground, re-radiated at a longer wavelength that we call heat, okay? And so the sunlight determines the temperature, okay? So in forest regions, we have competition for sunlight because the plants require that. And therefore, this is probably one of the things that pushed the evolution of woody plants to get taller, so that they could outstrip other plants for the sunlight, okay? Other plants that haven't been able to go that direction have had to evolve a tolerance for low sunlight conditions since they can photosynthesize with less light on the forest floor. So that is a abiotic factor that comes into place. And as far as sunlight in aquatic environments, such as the ocean, if it's deep enough, is that a lot of the light is absorbed in the upper few meters of ocean water, because that's where the photosynthetic plants, algae, happen to be. And also the water itself will absorb certain wavelengths of light, and it doesn't penetrate. You go deep enough down into the ocean, there's no light. It's dark, okay? Absolutely black. And that can also be true in deep lakes, even if it's like Lake Superior. It's deep enough that you can go down into an aphotic zone, all right? Photoperiod, okay, what do I mean by that? The length of time you have sunlight, it varies. It isn't always 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of dark. In winter, it's the day photoperiod is here around us is very, very short, but it's very long during the summer. Okay, it changes as you go through the seasons. The photoperiod at the equator varies very little, but photoperiods can As we go further north and further south from the equator, photoperiods can get really, you go to the point where you can have, during the winter, in the northern hemisphere, above the Arctic Circle, several months of dark. Okay, there's no light, sun never rises. And the same thing during our summer happens in the southern hemisphere, if you go to Antarctica. So photoperiods, and all these have their influences. There's other types of abiotic factors that are very important, is wind. The wind can increase evaporation, and increasing evaporation affects waterability. So all these things can interplay with each other. Soil, for plants and also other heterotrophic organisms that live there, because the soil contains organic nutrients, inorganic nutrients that plants need, and also the ability of the water to be maintained in the soil really depends on the texture. Okay, so if it's mostly sandy soil, real big rains, water retention is not very big. Water seeps through it and will go. However, if it happens to be just clay, real thin mineral particles stacked on top of each other, then the water can't penetrate and it runs off the surface and you lose it, okay? So water texture, or the soil texture, is an important abiotic factor. And periodic disturbances. These are real important too. Fires. Now here in California we've had way too many fires, but there are some plants here that their whole existence, reproduction, depends on fire. On Mount Diablo, there is a grove, because I hike up there, there is a grove of what is called bristlecone pine. And those pine cones retain the seeds unless they're burned, okay? And so if you continually put out fires there, these things just die, okay? They require fire to break open the cones to release seeds to create new. And there's other things like that. Glaciers, okay? They can, that's a disturbance. They can move in, destroy the plant life, and eventually melt. You have new soil that other organisms can colonize, and floods. That's a disturbance too, that leads to changes in the terrestrial habitat. Okay, so what is really important for where biomes happen to be is the climate. And the climate is a combination of precipitation and the amount of sunlight, temperature. On the average, the precipitation and temperature, this is what we refer to as climate, based on averages, okay, of the prevailing conditions of a particular place. Like here in California, we have what is called a Mediterranean climate, because all of our rainfall is clustered into a few months during the winter, and then we have long periods of just no rain. And the temperatures normally are not too hot, at least used to be. They're starting to get hotter. And this constitutes what is called the Mediterranean climate, and it's very much similar to what's in the Mediterranean Sea and tip of, on the coast of Australia and South America. We'll come back to that a little bit later. So climate is based on mean precipitation and mean temperatures for a given region. The major variables here, of course, precipitation, seasonal distribution of temperatures, because these are not the same. And all these differ, and this is the main thing that determines, in part, where deserts are, where deciduous forests are, where grasslands happen to be. And I'm going to go into this type of stuff. In fact, on the very next slide, I think. Okay, so these biomes, as I've been saying, they're determined by global patterns of climate that vary throughout the earth. Okay, so this here is a graph. It's called a climograph, excuse me. where on the x-axis, this is mean annual temperature, okay? Annual temperature. Down here is mean annual precipitation in centimeters. And notice here that tundra, what can you say about the biome that we call tundra?
Very cold.
Yeah, so it's usually cold, okay? And also low precipitation, okay? This is where you find tundra. Where do you find deserts?
High temperature, low precipitation.
0, that's not a high temperature. And this is mean annual
Oh.
temperature. Yeah, it's still a lot of them in hot areas, okay? But still, it's a wide temperature range. You have cold deserts, hot deserts. But what is the other salient factor there?
Their precipitation.
Very low precipitation. This is precipitation. Very low rainfall, okay? Whereas tropical forest, what can you say about?
High precipitation.
Generally high temperatures and generally high precipitation, okay? And so forth. And then you have some things here, savanna. Well, let's look at grassland, because we don't really have savanna in North America, but we do have grasslands on the other side of the Rocky Mountains, okay? High plains. And they overlap with chaparral. This is what California is. California is in this area. But grasslands and temperate deciduous forests. Where do we have temperate deciduous forests in North America?
Deciduous forest, is that redwood?
It's on the other side of the Rocky Mountains. East Coast, okay? From about Missouri onto the Atlantic Ocean. Southern states, that's where we have deciduous forests. These are dominated by oak and hickory trees. There's ash, but they lose their leaves during the winter, okay? They drop their leaves during the winter, okay? But you notice that they overlap with grasslands. So what would determine right in here, since this is both has the right temperature and the right amount of rainfall, that it could either be grassland or it could be temperate forest? What do you think might make a difference?
The soil.
What?
The soil.
The soil? It could, but there's another factor that's more prevalent. Let me say this. When Europeans first came to North America, there's journals of Spanish government officials that riding across Arkansas into Missouri over to the Mississippi River. And right now, if you go there, it's mostly oak, hickory forest. But according to their journals, it was grassland. Now that the forests have moved way to the west, because now this deciduous forest is in eastern Kansas, in eastern Nebraska, okay? Where that used to be 300 years ago or so, it used to be grassland.
So
But now
they-
we have forests there.
So they planted like trees or something?
No one planting trees. But it does have something about the Europeans.
Did they
Any idea?
Did they accidentally just bring invasive species and it just spreads around?
Well, no, we're not talking about trees planted by settlers. They did do that, but I'm talking about the native forest that has moved hundreds of miles to the west. What do you think?
The seeds?
You'll never guess this, probably. What?
Is it like the seeds? Like they.
Not
Oh,
heat.
wait.
No, not heat.
Oh wait, no, it doesn't
you're-
have to do with.
She said
I was-
seeds.
I was thinking
What?
about like the
Like
animals.
the seeds, she said.
Okay, what do we get in California almost every late summer? Here
Fire.
lately, fire, okay,
Oh.
fire. Fires are natural, and fires, grass comes back when there's a fire. Woody plants are destroyed by it. And so some of these fires were set intentionally by Native Americans to create more grassland for bison, okay? And so, it's, fires. Europeans don't like fires, and so they put them out. And it's mostly fire control that has led to the forest moving further to the west. Because it was another abiotic factor. Another abiotic factor which was involved in this area. Because this area here works for both in terms of temperature and rainfall. It works for both grasslands and for forest, okay? All right, and I can go on. We also have other things here, but this is where I'm gonna stop for today. All right? And I'll continue with the sunrise.